going on, guys? My name's Adam with 80 Proof Goods. I make handmade leather goods. I've been doing so for about 3 years now. I took it from a side hustle to a full-time job. I quit my job in 2021 and I've been full-time ever since. With that said, I picked up some tips and tricks along the way from other crafters. I've morphed them, changed them, made them my own over time, and I want to share that information or some of those tricks with you, whether you're a new crafter looking to get into leathercraft or you're someone who's been doing this for years. Never hurts to learn some new things. Some of these may be old, some things you may already know, but if you pick up a nugget or two, that's awesome because that's how we learn and grow. I want to share that with you now. My first tip revolves around dyeing edges. If you're someone who dyes the edges of your leather project, whether it's a wallet, a notebook cover, or a passport wallet, or a watch band, whatever it is, if you dye the edges of your project, you're probably using something like a Fiebing's leather dye or a pro dye, maybe with a little dab, a cotton dab dowel or something like that to spread it on. Pick up some empty markers. This is in no way by any means an original thought. It's something I picked up from someone else, but if you haven't thought of it, this is a great way to go to increase your efficiency and decrease messiness when it comes to dyeing edges. Empty paint markers you can get in packs of maybe like 10 or 12 on Amazon. They come empty with a little felt tip. You unscrew them, pour your dye into it, screw the cap back on, saturate that little tip, and then you're good to go. I've had the same markers for 2 years now and they're still wet, they still work. I've never had to replace them. I use them primarily, almost exclusively actually, on my belts. Again, super available on Amazon for very, very cheap. It's a cheap way to just do better, I guess. Tip number 2 is going to be around skiving. If you're someone who struggles with skiving, and if you're not familiar with skiving, it's thinning out the leather panel or leather piece so that when you stack them on top of each other, you're reducing some of the bulk. French skiver from Palo Santo Factory, it doesn't have to be from Palo Santo Factory, just a French skiver in general, is probably one of the easiest ways to get used to skiving and to skive your projects without so much human error that can come into play with things like Japanese skiving knives or those like shaving tools from Tandy or things like that. French skivers are super easy to get used to. There's not much of a learning curve, which I think is the biggest selling point in my opinion, because I've picked up Japanese skiving knives and other tools and I found that the learning curve is just atrocious on some of these tools. Japanese skiving knives in general are just an extremely delicate process and there's a lot of room for error. And I find that French skivers, not a lot of room for error, very easy to get used to, and they're super efficient. Tip number 3, my third tip, Pro Burnishing Machine. If you're someone who's still sanding by hand to get your edges nice and flush, anytime you put 2 pieces of leather together, you want to shave that down with sandpaper or something like that to get them flush and prepare them for burnishing. If you're doing it by hand, what the hell are you thinking? Go get a Pro Burnishing Machine, man. They can be a little pricey, I'm not gonna lie. Pro Burnishing Machine, I don't know if you can see, oh, there it is, right there, this thing. That thing right there was probably my best investment ever. It's a couple $100, but I've been using that exact same machine for years now without a single hiccup. It's never failed. On one side, there's sandpaper on a drum, and the other side, there is a wood slicker on a drum with a bunch of grooves, just like a regular hand wood slicker. And so you can shave down your edges and get them nice and flush with the sandpaper. Then you can switch over to the wood slicker and burnish them if that's your preferred method. It's not my preferred method, but I use the sandpaper on that drum thing all the time right there. Boop. Yeah, so stop using the sandpaper by hand. That's probably the biggest takeaway from this video is that. Sandpaper by hand, you end up having to, you go back and forth, elbow grease, shaving that down, maybe with like a 120 grit, and then a 400 grit, and then 800 grit, and a 1000 grit, but it saves you a lot of time. So if you're looking to be more efficient with your process and get more done in a day, it's a great way to go. Tip number 4 is gonna be tape. Tandy tape, to be exact. That's what I call it. It's basically double-sided tape from Tandy. It's a great way to avoid having to use glue on areas that you really otherwise don't need to use glue. You can tape down interior T-slots or card slots in your wallet, places that you're not gonna see, and you don't have to use glue. You can tape it down just in time to get it to the sewing machine or to hand stitch it. The tape will hold it there in preparation for stitching, essentially. So if you're folding over the edge of a tote bag, or if you're folding over the edges of a desk mat like I do or something like that, anywhere you're like rolling the edges over, use tape. You don't have to glue that. It's a waste of time. You gotta glue the whole thing and you gotta fold it over and then you gotta clamp it down and wait for it to dry and stick and then you unclamp it. Just use tape, it's easy. I use 2 different sizes, a 3/8 inch and an 1/8 of an inch. The 3/8 I use for bigger projects, like if I'm folding over the edges, like I said, on a desk mat or tote bag. And I'll use the 1/8 inch for things like card slots. And I use it a lot on my passport wallets. I'm sure you've seen different kind of wallets as well. So great way to go instead of using glue. That's tip number 4. Tip number 5 is arguably the biggest one aside from the Pro Burnishing Machine, and that's gonna be my burnishing method of choice. There's a ton of different ways to burnish. You can use a wood slicker, beeswax, gum trag, different methods like that, and I've tried all of them. I've tried all of the different burnishing methods, and the one that I found that works the best and I will never stray from is toconol and canvas cloth. Together, not individually, together. So toconol, if you're not familiar, is basically like a gummy material or gummy liquid that comes in a container. It comes from Japan. You put that, you like dab it on to your edges, and then you burnish it, and it basically finishes your edge. It's gonna give you a nice glossy, glassy looking edge. It's gonna lay down all the loose fibers, and this is of course done after sanding. So use your Pro Burnishing Machine that you're gonna pick up, or use your sandpaper, whatever your method is, and then you use toconol. Now after the toconol is applied, you can then use a wood slicker or whatever the method is. Canvas cloth, not waxed, not anything special. 3 years ago when I started this business, I went to a Michael's Crafts, just a regular old craft store, and I bought a really cheap, like $10 or $12 roll of canvas cloth, and it's just plain white cloth, canvas cloth, and I cut off little strips like this big, I fold them over a bunch of times, and I put my toconol in my project, and then I burnish with the canvas cloth. If you've seen any of my videos, you've probably seen me do that and talk about it 100 times. It's the biggest, most impactful way that I've increased my quality on my products. Now the toconol you can put in a little needle applicator bottle, again, something you can get off of Amazon, and that makes it super precise, reduces some of the mess. I used to dip my finger in the toconol and do it, but then you got a finger of toconol and it's everywhere and it's blah. Once the canvas cloth is dirty, fold it the other way around, use it again, fold it another direction, use it again, fold it another, and then once it's dirty, you toss it out, you rip off a new piece. I've been using, no joke, the same piece of canvas cloth that I bought in 2020. I'm still using that roll today. That's how efficient this is and how cheap of a method it is, but how effective it is. If there's anything else that you think you want me to touch on or talk about or explain my thoughts on the method, I'm happy to do that and break it down. But for now, that's been my top 5 tips for old or new leather crafters. Let me know what you think in the comments. A subscribe also goes a long way to help build the small business. Thanks.